I got an email from forwarded from somebody who forwarded it from somebody else type of thing, and it was all, we'll ascend into star beings as of December 21st type of thing. And so it occurred to me, I just said we're going to talk about the Great Conjunction and some of the associated cycles. I didn't say how I felt about it, so I just wanted to find out, like, who's thinking what and who's anticipating what, and who already has some thoughts on the Great Conjunction and the unfolding cycles that evolve from it, and who, and who's just here to just kind of learn, something that's brand new. Just go ahead. I'm not going to call people in order or anything. Just go ahead and speak up if you're curious, or if you have any thoughts.
I see it as sort of moving into the age of information and ideas, versus before, the last time they were conjunct. It was all about Earth, utilizing Earth, the Industrial Revolution and the like. So I think we're going towards sort of a mind, intellectual ideas based, maybe with Aquarius, maybe like bartering as well. So I don't see it as being as, when you think of Earth-based, think of Pentacles as well. I think it's going to be more towards ideas, obviously the internet, more computers, AI, things like that.
Yeah.
And more community as well. I think that this this COVID, I think, will help us realize the benefit of having community. I think we've been so separated for so long.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the themes that I'm going to address as well. Anybody else have any thoughts that has kind of thought about this or looked into it? Laura's raising her hand.
I think one thing, a lot of people that I've kind of talked to have also been sort of, they seem to be on like the star ascension, sort of like, oh, it's the age of Aquarius, it's all this, it's going to be great. I'm a little worried because, Saturn rules Aquarius just like it rules Capricorn. It's still Saturn. It's still going to be like sort of, I'm afraid that what we might move from is like the tyranny of the earth, like the hierarchical thing, to the tyranny of the mob. I think that might be the challenge of the air and the Aquarius stuff that we're kind of moving into.
Yeah.
But it's still Saturn. You know what I'm saying? It's still going to be problematic. I don't think it's going to be all sweetness and light and all that stuff. I think the opportunities will be different and, maybe hopefully better than kind of in some ways what we've seen. But I think the problems will also be, there's still going to be Saturn problems.
Right.
So, yeah.
I
think that's my main big like worry, right? Is that
We'll keep that in mind, the tyranny of the mob, because I think that there is definitely something to be said for that I will address in some of the research based on some of the research I did. So yeah, nice interpretation. Who else has any thoughts or ideas?
I'll also kind of piggybacking a little bit on the fact that like I for the people like the Ascension people, like this isn't like an overnight thing. It's not like they turn the light switch on and like, oop, all of a sudden it's like, no, it's going to take a long time for any of this to even really sink down to our world.
Yeah.
Like, or should not in our lives. Like we will.
Well, yeah, a 200-year cycle will take a while to unfold.
Yeah.
Right. Like I will not be alive. None of us will be alive just to the end of this cycle, so.
I might be alive, but.
Yeah, Reese will.
Well, you are in LA, so yeah, I'm sure you're working on that.
You're a little later.
Awesome. Anybody else want to kind of share some thoughts or ideas on what you already know about this, what you have read, anything like that? Any questions, anything?
I'll just share that I'm a little bit more familiar with tarot than astrology. So I hope I'm not the only like beginner astrology in here. But I'm interested
you are.
Thanks. I'm
You're
interested
not.
in learning everything, and I'm also interested in how you're going to connect this with the tarot with our birth charts. So I'm
Yeah.
interested to see that.
Okay,
Thanks.
cool.
I'm zooming from
Cool.
LA.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you. So yeah, if you're just coming in, remember to grab a tarot deck, and also if you have your birth chart or can pull that quickly, which nowadays people can pull it pretty quickly, go ahead and grab that. Yeah, astro.com, alab.com, astro-seek. All of those are good places to get a chart, to pull a chart pretty easily. Okay, so here we are. Welcome everyone to the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. And today our topic is the Great Conjunction through the lens of tarot. And we're going to be looking at this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And I illustrated it, of course, they conjoin in the first degree of Aquarius. So I illustrate it with the Aquarian Tarot. What better deck? And this is the star card. And the star card is associated with Aquarius. So here's our agenda. We're going to look, first of all, at the mythology behind Jupiter and Saturn, because the mythology is very interesting in this particular cycle. And not only the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, but also the theme for 2021, which will be Saturn square Uranus. Uranus is the granddad, Saturn is the father, and Zeus is the son. And so those three are in a family kind of hierarchy. And I did put up Saturn square Uranus as a topic for the beginning of January. So watch for that. Then besides looking at the mythology, we're going to look at the actual conjunction itself, Jupiter and Saturn. But then in order to get a sense of where this overall, we'll be looking at the conjunction itself. We'll be looking at the 20-year cycle, that it's 20 years until the next conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Then we'll be looking at the 200-year cycle, which is the conjunctions, the ongoing conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn being all in air signs. In order to get a sense of that ongoing cycle, we'll look at a historical perspective. And the last time these planets had their conjunctions in air signs was 1226 to 1425. We'll look at the symbolism through the lens of tarot, and then we're going to find out what your story is based on this placement in your, how it's going to hit your chart. So the mythology, the story of a father and a son, and that image is so gross. I'm going to just go straight forward. Some of the themes that we're looking for are not all love and light in this particular interpretation. So the story of Rhea, Zeus, and Cronus. So Cronus is Saturn, and he learned from his parents, Gaia and Uranus, that his own son would overthrow him. So rather than take a chance, he decided he would swallow each of his children so that they could not overthrow him. Rhea, of course, his wife, was horribly upset and suffered unending grief at the loss of each of her children. Only in Greek mythology, right? So when the time came for her to give birth to Zeus, she talked to Gaia and Uranus. They were her parents too. Cronus and Rhea were brother and sister, because this is back at the beginning of time, and the earth is Gaia, and the sky is Uranus, and they gave birth to a set of monsters that got imprisoned, and then they gave birth to the Titans, which were Rhea and Kronos and some others. So anyway, they were brother and sister. So she talked to her parents, Gaia and Uranus, and they devised a plan. They sent Rhea away to bear her son in secret. Meanwhile, they gave Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. He devoured it, completely fooled. When Zeus was grown, he returned and forced Cronus to disgorge his siblings. Then he banished Cronus to Tartarus, the pit under the earth. And then later, later he relented and released Kronos, and he ended up becoming the ruler of the blessed dead. So the great conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn, and this was from earthsky.org, and this is actually on December 16th when the moon will be also conjoined those two planets. And of course, this is a stargazing perspective, so we're seeing them in the constellation of Capricornus, which is where they are positioned at a sidereally. However, in tropical Western astrology, they will be conjoining on December 21st at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so Jupiter and Saturn conjoin once every 20 years. There's a few, like I said, there's a few different things going on. First of all, we have this actual conjunction that you can see in the sky that is happening on December 21st, where Jupiter and Saturn get together. Jupiter and Saturn do that, they come together once every 20 years. And so over the next 20 years, Jupiter will separate from Saturn, open that up, he'll come into an opposition, he'll come back around and then close that down. 20 years from now, there will be another conjunction. This year, Jupiter and Saturn are very close together, 1/10 of a degree apart. I think even Earth Sky ashamedly said that they were going to be so hard that they would blend into a single planet or something like that. And I hear about that kind of stuff all the time. I do a lot of stargazing, and it's like, no, even 1/10 of a degree is far enough apart that you can definitely see them being separate. Plus, you can't actually go out and see them at the time of the exact conjunction because it's daylight. So you have to go the night before, the night after the exact conjunction, and they're not gonna look like a single star, but they will be very, very close together, and more and closer together than in many of their usual conjunctions. Also, you can't always see them because sometimes their conjunctions, of course, are too close to the sun, and so they're not visible. But in this case, they've been visible all summer. I don't even know how long. They were really nicely visible all during the summer, though, and you could go out at night and watch them. They're really clear. Right now, I can't see them anymore because of the way the trees are and some other things. But I'm hoping, I've been trying to find a place that I can walk to that I can get a good view of them. I haven't found it yet, but I'm gonna see if I can try. So they're far enough away from the sun to be seen clearly. So you can go out in the evenings and look and kind of get used to watching them, because if you get used to looking at them, then as they get closer together, you can watch that. And also you kind of know when and where to look because you've tried a number of times. So go out and start watching them and see what you can see. So the Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions are in signs of the same element for 200 years at a time. So we've got this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that's happening in December in Aquarius. And so then the next one 20 years from now will be in Libra. And then I think 20 years from then, I think it goes into Gemini. And it just goes around through the air signs. Now, they'll do that. They'll have those 20-year conjunctions in the same sign for 200 years at a time. Now, what's one of the things that's really neat about this particular conjunction is it's the very first that marks this 200-year cycle in air signs. And so prior to this, the last 200 years plus or minus have been in earth signs. And that's a pretty significant cycle to be in, for those important conjunctions to happen every 200 years. The reason this is called the Great Conjunction is that of the visible planets, these are the two slowest, they're the two largest, they don't come together very often, only every 20 years. And so it is more of an event when they do. There was a little bit of a preview into the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in air signs back in 1980 and 81. There was a triple conjunction in Libra at that time. And that was due to a retrograde where they were going forward, conjoined, then the retrograde happened, they conjoined again. Then once they went direct, they had that third and final conjunction. And that was, remember, that was the time when Ronald Reagan got elected and that kind of stuff. They're going to be in air signs from 2020 to 2219. So again, 200 years. The last time they were in air signs was 1226 to 1425. And so I did a little research into that time period. Looking into the historical perspective, I found a number of things that I thought were very interesting. The first thing that I kind of stumbled across is that's when the Papal Inquisition was. And apparently the Inquisition, there's the Spanish Inquisition and some other things, but the Papal Inquisition, which is the criminal prosecution of heretics, that happened, that kind of got formalized and went under the jurisdiction of the Pope right at the basically the same time as this cycle began back in 1226. So we'll look at that. I kind of gave these fancy titles, but Power to the People is another section that I have. The Fight for Justice, and then Finding Footing in a Wider World. Looking back, and one of the reasons we look back to history is to understand what the themes were that played out when this happened before. I have to give a bunch of caveats. I am not a historian. I like to research things, but I don't even know that I'm very good at researching things. I get frustrated because, I'll read something in one article and then another article contradicts it. And I'm like, well, which one's right? What am I not understanding something? Things like that. And two, this research is based on me finding out that never having studied this before and suddenly finding out that it matched the dates like last week and putting in some extra effort to try to learn about this. So I don't have like years of knowledge behind this. And also, just in terms of, and this always bothers me when I hear presentations on astrology. Astrologers are really good at kind of cherry picking things that match. And so I was trying to really note things that were lasting and whose dates really closely matched up with the dates of the Jupiter Saturn cycle. And so so I think I did at least do that part pretty well. But and then of course, just my own strengths and weaknesses and prejudices and everything else will play a part. It's just like, what do I already know about? I'm going to veer towards things that I already have some knowledge on and not have and veer away from things that I'm ignorant about. It's a flawed process, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So those caveats aside, the Papal Inquisition. Basically, what happened is that there was already a criminal prosecution of heretics prior to the Papal Inquisition, but it was done by bishops, so it was episcopal. And then right around this time period, in fact, it was about 1231. There was something around 12. Innocent III had started to do some things, and then Pope Gregory the IX kind of came in and made some changes, and he put it under the rulership of the Pope. So the Pope was in charge of the prosecution of heretics, not the bishops anymore. So he centralized this prosecution. And one of the things that he did is to establish a number of policies that brought a certain amount of order and legal structure to the heresy trials. And it's important to recognize, and I think this is one of the themes that I noticed, is that during this whole time, there was a strong pull or tug of war between centralized authority and decentralized authority. And that comes up in a lot of the different things that I researched. And so the idea of somebody suggested earlier, mob rule, the tyranny of the mob. So that is a good way of looking at this. First of all, just to look at what heretics are, of course, heretics don't espouse the beliefs of the Christian church. And some of them, well, and I researched it a little bit, but I don't want to try to sound too ignorant by trying to describe what they believed. But some examples of heretics were the Cathars and the Waldensians and some things like that. They stood up for their own beliefs against the powerful authority of the church. Rebellion against authority is an Aquarian ideal. And heretic groups, the ones that were mentioned at least, tended to follow ascetic lifestyles. And poverty and fasting belong to Saturn. And so that's kind of interesting that some of our themes are showing up here already. And so, and then Pope Gregory came along and tried to give a little more structure to this. Structure is going to be Saturn, and Jupiter. I've always associated Jupiter with justice, and so I think some astrologers associate different planets with that, but I've always thought Jupiter represented like a judge or a magistrate or or something like that, truth, things like that. So the Pope selected judges, and usually the judges were also of mendicant orders, and they had taken a vow of poverty, and they would travel. They were kind of nomadic, which is poverty is a Saturn word, and traveling is kind of a Jupiter word. So they would travel around from place to place to have these trials. And one of the main defining factors at this time was that inquisitio takes place of accusatio. So there was no more, the legal thing that changed was that an accusation was no longer needed. They invented depositions at this time, and they would sit down somebody and interview them and record the interview. They would have a scribe that would write down everything that was said. And this inquiry would reveal things that they wanted to then prosecute. And so no accuser was necessary. Judges could call suspects into court. And this is the other thing, based on public opinion. So they would call people in based on their reputation in the community. Fama, publica fama is the Latin term for that. So the idea that societal opinion established the charges fits into the Aquarian paradigm. And of course, obviously, we could say from our perspective today that it perverts that paradigm, but nevertheless, it does fit into that paradigm of ideals arising from the community. So the inquisitors changed their interrogation methods to no longer ask about beliefs, but about actions. And this is really interesting because the whole thing about heresy is that it is about what you believe. But one of the things Pope Gregory changed is this idea that they had to find evidence of the belief through the person's actions. So you can't be put on trial for what you think. And again, Aquarius is about thoughts. Saturn is going to insist on seeing the results, the actions of those thoughts. And that is the line that is drawn. It's like, what this person thinks is not enough to accuse them. We have to see the evidence of that. Now, obviously, there was a lot of corruption in the Inquisition, so I'm not saying that these rules were followed, but these were things that were evidenced. And again, this is that tug of war that we're seeing between the central authority and this can be good or bad. I mean, in this case, the central authority of the papacy, Gregory was trying to make things right. And then as far as I could tell, I haven't studied him, and how his judges, how they went about actually applying his rules, that's open for interpretation, and they didn't always apply them in the spirit of the law. So going on to our next topic, Aquarius, power to the people. And part of that power to the people was the idea of, I think, of those heretics standing up and saying, you know what, because those heretic movements got increased greatly during this time period. And I think it was towards the end of this Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions in air signs back in that time period. I think they kind of increased during that time period, and then eventually fell apart again. So the Magna Carta is described as the greatest constitutional document of all times, the foundation of freedom of the individual against the arbitrary authority of the despot. And so again, the freedom of the individual is a very Aquarian ideal. When you think of your signs, think of Leo on the one hand, and the opposite is Aquarius. Leo is the lion. He's the king of the jungle. It's in the spotlight. We think of those things when we think of Leo. Leo is the king. Aquarius is opposite of that. So Aquarius is the people, the community, the public. When we have significant transits to Aquarius, such as this cycle of conjunctions, we are moving away from the centralized king and into the decentralized public. So the freedom of the individual against the arbitrary authority of the despot. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215, just 10 years before that switch out of earth signs into air signs happened the last time this happened. Some other examples, this is the time of Chaucer. It's an English author who wrote in the common language, and his dates were 1343 to 1400. There was the Peasants' Revolt in England, the first great popular rebellion in English history. That was at 1381. The Bible was translated into English. Again, all of a sudden, information that we talk about with Aquarius and with air in general, information becoming generally available to people because it's no longer written in the language of the nobles, either in Latin or in French, but it's written in the language of the common people. Again, I'm focusing on an English history because that's kind of more of my interest and background, and the little bit of knowledge that I have. Henry IV required literature and official documents to be in English, and his reign was during that time, 1399 to 1413. So those are some examples of where the people were empowered because information became more readily available to them. Jupiter and Saturn, the fight for justice. As we said, the Magna Carta was signed in 1215, and it established trial by jury. And so Aquarius, a jury of your peers. Of course, the intent of the Magna Carta was more that nobles would be judged by nobles, but nevertheless, it set a precedent. And so this idea of, your community gets to judge you, not somebody that is opposed to your community. Establishment of the right against self-incrimination, literally the right to remain silent, which we have in our Miranda Act now, that came into being as a result of the Inquisition trials. and that was in 1234. And Saturn is associated with silence, so the right to say, I'm not going to say anything, I'm not going to incriminate myself. The first use of the deposition, 1237, recorded out of court testimony to gather information, air signs information. Saturn is something that's permanent, it's recorded. Now, again, they were partly using, and I could not determine this from my study, but it sounds like the deposition and the inquiry, or the inquisitio, the inquisition part, it sounds like those are the same thing to me. If they're not, I'm not totally understanding it. So I'll just put that out there. I'm kind of hoping in this talk, I'm kind of hoping to trigger things for you if you do already know some of this history and can actually explore it, or if any of it triggers you to research it further, just out of curiosity. I'm just trying to hit some highlights that I think are relevant. But recorded testimony, Saturn makes it permanent, air signs is information. And there's the first time somebody said, I have an idea. Why don't we suggest that all the defendants swear to tell the truth? Jupiter is truth, Aquarius is truth. Saturn is to, swear. Saturn binds things, it's a binding obligation. So this idea of, let's just ask them to tell the truth. Let's have them swear to tell the truth, and see what happens. And we still do that. So I guess we think it works. So those are some examples of this fight for justice that arose during this time period. Finding footing in a wider world. Jupiter as expansion, and Saturn as, I finally decided on testing foundations. A lot of foundations were set during this time, but I think there was a lot of upset, particularly during this time period between 1225 and 1226 and 1425. There was a lot of kind of overthrow, and we'll kind of get back to that later on. But remember, Jupiter overthrows Saturn, and so that's kind of one of our themes. The Mongol Empire, which established really extensive trade routes, their dates roughly 1206 to 1368. They kind of correlate to this time period. It was the largest, which is a Jupiter keyword, contiguous land empire in world history. And it was composed of a multitude, again, Jupiter as exploration, as variety, of different peoples, religions, and civilizations. Marco Polo, the Italian merchant who traveled to Europe and Asia, from Europe to Asia in order to trade. He expanding horizons as Jupiter. He brought so much stuff back from Asia that people had never heard of. So there was a sense of a bigger world, things that they hadn't heard of. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299. Very curiously, Genghis Khan died right like 1227. So right at the beginning of this entire cycle. And I think, and again, I haven't studied this. I went to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science and saw the exhibit, but I don't remember anything from it. I wonder if this is an example of having a really strong centralized leader, Genghis Khan, then he died, the empire he created maintained. I'm still on Mongol. I jumped to Ottoman and now I went back to Genghis Khan. Sorry. The Mongol Empire, he died at the beginning of our time period, but his empire lasted for quite a long time and was decentralized. And so again, a really interesting shift from a central authority to a decentralized empire. So curious about that. Again, I'm not a historian, but if somebody knows about that, it's interesting to explore that idea. Going on, the Ottoman Empire, which is around, it's now it's currently modern day Turkey, but the Ottoman Empire was all around the Mediterranean Sea. It went into northern Africa, and that lasted for 600 years. In fact, tarot cards come out of the Ottoman Empire. But that, interestingly, the Encyclopedia Britannica article online specifically addressed that there was continual expansion of the Ottoman Empire from 1300 to 1481, really close to our dates for our time frame, and expansion is Jupiter. And then it lasted for 600 years. Again, it broke apart, and there were some things like that, but it lasted for a good long time, and that'll be Saturn. Once Saturn will cause things to collapse when they don't work, but once they work, Saturn will hold things together for a really long time. The Black Death, the worst pandemic in history, peak 1347 to 1351, right during our time frame. Saturn is pestilence. So just a few ideas that we can look at for the 200-year cycle, the big cycle. This is the last time this happened, when Jupiter and Saturn were having their conjunctions in air signs, the 200-year period. So let's move into tarot now. And I'll go through some of the cards, and then we'll start to look at our individual charts. So the major arcana cards are the Wheel of Fortune for Jupiter, the World for Saturn, and the Star card for Aquarius. And these are based on the Golden Dawn attributions for the cards. One of the things that's very interesting is that in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is this is the Aquarian, as I mentioned before, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck has the 4 cherubs in both the Wheel of Fortune and the World. And you can see them here in the World: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. And they represent the 4 fixed signs: Taurus, Leo, the eagle is Scorpio, and the man is Aquarius. And those 4 cherubs are in the Wheel of Fortune card in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the fact that those 2 cards that share that, those are the 2 that are coming together, and they're coming together in right now in Aquarius, but then they'll be in the air signs. So it's not all fixed signs, but nevertheless, I think that's kind of interesting. I think partly because the cycle starts in Aquarius, and it did in the 1225 date. And so maybe there is something there to that idea of those fixed signs, and what are we trying to establish? And that's also a good Saturn keyword. And one thing that's also going to be interesting, particularly as a theme for this year, is the fact that Uranus and Saturn will be square for the majority of the year. And Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius, and Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And so having the 2 rulers of that sign square to each other is going to be interesting, almost like a let's duke it out. Does Saturn's traditionalism get to play, or does Uranus and his freedom and individuality and individualism, does he get to overthrow the tradition? So that's another kind of interesting thing to look at. But those fixed signs tend to have a lot of stability to them. So that comes in as a theme. And that, of course, Aquarius is over here. And I particularly like this illustration, not just because it's so pretty, but it's got a peacock on it. And a peacock is the animal that pulled Jupiter's chariot in a lot of medieval depictions of Jupiter. So pulled Hera's chariot, but Jupiter is shown with that in a number of illustrations that I found. So kind of cool there. The minor arcana cards, these are the Aquarius pips, the 5 of Swords, 6 of Swords, and 7 of Swords. I didn't bother to list all the Jupiter and Saturn ruled cards because there's just like, I don't know, there's 8 of them, I guess, but we can talk about it, I guess, if it comes up. This is what's interesting, though, is the Jupiter court cards and the Saturn court cards. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is the Knight of Wands, and he rules Pisces, which is the Knight of Cups. And Saturn rules Capricorn, which is the Queen of Pentacles, and Aquarius, which is the King of Swords. So look at what we get. We get the King of Swords, we get the Queen of Pentacles, Knight of Cups, and Knight of Wands. King of Swords is Kronos, the ruler of time. Queen of Pentacles is Rhea, swaddling a stone. Zeus, hidden, is the Knight of Cups. And you can even see in this, he's walking away in the direction that he's facing. He's hiding. And then the Knight of Wands, Wands is fire and action. He is the returning Zeus to overthrow Saturn and to restart the cycle. And I translated that into some Rider-Waite-Smith cards just because I think it's a little easier to see, because the knights, it's really important to me that the knights be on horseback. I love the Aquarian deck, but it's frustrating when you don't see those knights on horseback. You don't get quite the same feel. This could be a King of Wands. You know, if you didn't have this knight down here, it would be hard to tell the difference between him and a King of Wands. You know, except for the fact that he's more youthful looking is the only difference. But here we see this King of Wands and this, you know, the rearing, you know, rushing forward of the Knight of Wands coming in to overthrow, and just Rhea with her you know, childlike, the way she's holding that pentacle, and that's the stone, and our Zeus heading away to hide and then returning to overthrow. So from here, we'll go into what's your story. And I stole this graphic from the Astrology podcast. It's from Chris Brennan. And I have a graphic that I used to teach the houses, but it's not nearly as pretty. So I'm like, I'm just going to take Chris's. And so he has slightly different meanings, pretty close to what I use, but slightly different. So we'll look at where Jupiter and Saturn hit your chart, what house they hit your chart. So if you grab the copy of this handout, if you don't know the houses, you can refer to this. And just primarily you can focus on these keywords in here, but these positions, these planets here represent where the house that the planet has its joy in. And that's Chris's thesis, is that the meanings of the houses derive from the planetary joys. And so, but we're not going to talk about that. I just thought it was a pretty graphic. So anyway, coming up, Astrology and Tarot, Let's Go. That is going to be hosted by the Denver Tarot Meetup, and that will be Saturday, December 19th. It is in the afternoon. It's our normal day that we normally meet for the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup, but it's going to be in the afternoon. That's 2:30 to 4:30 Pacific time, or 3:30 to 5:30 Denver time. That is $10. You don't have to pay in advance. The organizer of the Denver Tarot Meetup will contact people via email afterwards to collect money via PayPal. So feel free to join us for that. And then the theme for 2021, Saturn square Uranus, that'll be the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup on Saturday, January 2nd, 9:30 to 11:30 Pacific time. And these events are free. Of course, if you ever want to make a donation, you can do so If you go, it's kind of weird to get to my donation button right now with my new website. I have to fix this, but right now, if you go from a computer, if you go into any blog post, you can find a donate button. I'm not sure that those things are showing up if you use your phone, though. I have to figure that out. So I'll go ahead and do the final thing, and then we'll go into some questions and stuff like that. So thank you for attending the Great Conjunction Through the Lens of Tarot. My website is joyvernon.com for more information. You can go to my blog using completelyjoyous.com, and I've got over 300 articles there. Follow all of our great events here at the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. And of course, please subscribe to me on YouTube, and it's Joy Vernon Astrology Tarot Reiki, and you can find that on YouTube. We're going to look at what house in your chart this 0-degree conjunction in Aquarius is going to happen, and kind of talk about how it might affect you personally. I think some of the themes that we're looking at based on what we saw from before is the central, the tug of war between a central authority and a decentralized authorities. Or the king versus the people. We looked at themes of overthrowing, Jupiter overthrowing Saturn. We looked at themes of finding truth and information, and some other things like that. The other thing that you can do, look at these 3 cards together. Pull your Wheel of Fortune, your World card, and your Star card. And then you'll pull the card that is symbolic. And so this says Jupiter and Saturn, and this says in Aquarius. Then you'll pull the card for your house. And so these are the cards for the houses. So get ready to write this down. First house is the Emperor. Second house is the Hierophant. Third house is the Lovers. Fourth house is the Chariot. Fifth house is Strength. Sixth house is the Hermit. Seventh house is Justice. Eighth house is Death. Ninth house is Temperance. 10th house is the Devil. 11th house is the Star, so you'd need a second Star card. And 12th house is the Moon. And I'll go through that one more time. So take a breath. First house is the Emperor. Second house is the Hierophant. Third house is the Lovers. Fourth house is the Chariot. Fifth house is Strength. Sixth house is the Hermit. Seventh house is Justice. Eighth house is Death. Ninth house is Temperance. 10th house is Devil. 11th house is the Star, and the 12th house is the Moon. And so add that card, whatever that card is for the house where Aquarius is in your chart, and add that to the mix. And then just treat it like a tarot reading or a tarot spread, and you can then interpret it that way. Any questions? Was this fun?
It was great. Thank you.
It was really good. Really enjoyed it.
Good.
Me too. Good stuff.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah,
That was
absolutely.
fabulous,
Happy
Joy. It
trails.
really was.
Everybody have a good weekend.